that even though we are intergenerational, we are youth-led, i.e. youth being the South African version of youth, right? Like 35 and under. No, I'm serious. And that Black Lives Matter is also multi-sector and cross-class. Yeah? All right, let's talk a little bit about this network. So as I mentioned, Black Lives Matter is 26 chapters internationally. So we have 24 chapters here in the US, 2 chapters internationally, one in Toronto, Canada, and the other one in Accra, Ghana. And then Black Lives Matter has come to be known as the moniker for a broader movement around the lives of Black people. Yeah? So Black Lives Matter, in as much as it's conceptualized, begins as an organizing project and then becomes the moniker for a much broader configuration of organizers, activists, individuals, families, institutions, etc. So I'm going to speak specifically to the network, but again, there are many people here that can talk to the contours of the movement as a whole. One thing I want to just lift up again is that we are multi-sector and quote-unquote multi-issue, although I don't like using multi-issue. Because again, what we are fighting around, right, are the contours of Black life. And what that looks like in our network, for example, is people who are doing work around policing and criminal justice. I should mention that all of those chapters are working on local campaigns in their areas and then are connected nationally and internationally. So policing and criminal justice, development, housing, and gentrification, gender justice, trans-liberation, economic justice, anti-austerity and privatization, climate justice, education, corporate accountability, and rights, dignity, and respect for lesbian, gay, and bisexual folks. And I do separate trans-liberation and lesbian, gay, and bisexual humanity, right? Because I think oftentimes we mix them when they are, in fact, quite complex and not one and the same. I think just to say the movement as a whole, if I were to give it some contours, which I feel hesitant to do, but I would say that the movement as a whole is also cross-sectoral and intergenerational, but certainly coalesced around the issues of criminal justice and mass incarceration. Yeah? And what crosses borders, right? What crosses the edges of how and where and why people are organizing, again, is around the contours of Black life, and in particular, fighting back against anti-Black racism, but also fighting for the dignity, humanity, and respect for all people, right? I appreciated Jelani's earlier comments about not wanting to boil this down to merely a class struggle. And it is important for us, both folks who are looking to build a better world, folks who are organizing to build a better world, that we understand that race is a contour that cannot be ignored. And that we understand, right, that as folks are fighting for their basic humanity, fighting for our basic humanity, that what that means for us, right, is the ability to walk down the street with our heads held high. It also means the ability to watch your children grow up to be adults. It means the ability to make decisions over your future. It means the ability to live in communities that are free of violence. It also means the ability to live in communities that have the resources that they need to survive. And it also means a shift in how we understand what we think this world can look like. So the contours thus far, I think, that we kind of come out of, right, in some ways have lost their anti-capitalist character. And what I would say, and what I feel incredibly proud of, is that for the network in particular, that there are visions beyond capitalism. Right? And I'm not sure that folks in the BLM network would call themselves socialists necessarily, but I would say that most people will agree that capitalism is not the economic system that will get us to where we're trying to go. If I were to talk a little bit about the intersections between Black Lives Matter and the Fight for 15, and by the way, we'll see y'all, everybody here November 10th, right? Yeah, you better get excited about that. Y'all are like quiet. I don't know if you had coffee. I'm like excited about November 10th. I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to be in the country, but I know I'm going to be turned up somewhere, right? I think the Fight for 15 and this movement that is incredible is largely similar to Black Lives Matter in that it's cross-sectoral, right? And that the class character, however, I think is solidly working class. There's more of a multiracial character, as I understand it, in the Fight for 15 movement than there is in Black Lives Matter, although certainly there are affinity groups that have developed around Black Lives Matter. For example, we have a growing national group called Asians for Black Lives that is taking action both inside and outside of the labor movement to question the ways in which Asian Americans in particular are used as a wedge against the progress of African Americans. We can talk more about that in the Q&A. And I want to tell a story about the linkages between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Fight for 15, because we can't actually talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about a few things. One, the uprisings that occurred in Oakland after the murder of Oscar Grant. We can't talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about the uprisings that ensued when Trayvon Martin's killer was acquitted in 2013. And then certainly we can't talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about the uprisings that ensued in Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed. I had the honor of spending just a little bit of time, 5 weeks or so, in Ferguson, Missouri, working with organizers and organizations on the ground there. And there were nightly protests in front of the Ferguson Police Department. And those protests were largely yet led by young Black people.